Moving on, the campaign group Don't Divide Us produced a report last year which found that 1 in 4 councils were promoting contentious diversity policies. The report also found that 89% of these councils were using third-party providers, including commercial companies and charities. A forthcoming report from Don't Divide Us will look more closely at these third-party providers and what issues they're promoting. And author Alka Sehgal Cuthbert from Don't Divide Us joins me now. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew.
So, Alka, I think firstly we should talk a little bit about Don't Divide Us. What is it that you are seeking to do?
Well, we are seeking to oppose ideas that are being promoted in our institutions under the name of anti-racism. But actually, when you look at what they're doing, they're actually re-racialising, you know, in situations where people are getting along fine, where at a point historically where Britain, you know, in Britain, race has never been less of a factor in, you know, how well you can do in terms of living your life freely. At that exact point, we have this ideology come in that says that is really wanting to ensure that we see race first and foremost, you know. It's
very interesting because a lot of teacher friends of mine, I mean, you do a lot of work with schools, and a lot of teachers have contacted me to say that this is going on.
Yeah.
A teacher friend of mine said that an outside speaker came in, took all of the black pupils out of the class to tell them all how oppressed they were.
Yeah.
And of course they weren't happy about this either. I mean, this is the kind of anecdote that you're hearing a lot of.
We are getting many more stories from parents and teachers like this. We've got, you know, there's one school in leafy Muswell Hill. You know, it's not downtown Bronx or LA. They've brought in a third-party provider, a group called Arise, I believe, and you know, in part of the process of the school going on its actively anti-racist journey, they're now getting all the classes to sign active anti-racist pledges.
OK.
So they are also, this is a very interesting thing, they're also funding just black children to go to extra classes as well.
So when they say anti-racist, because, you know, I would consider myself anti-racist because I'm opposed to racism, I'm sure you would consider yourself anti-racist.
Yes.
That's not what they mean, though, is it?
No, it isn't. I mean, active, you know, this new, if you like, the modern anti-racism is rooted in critical social justice theory, and it locks people into their race. Now, as an individual, you can, you know, you can have memories and relate to your race or your sex or gender as individually. But the key thing is you're a person, and then you can decide whether it's going to be important or not important, or whether you know, whether you're going to retrospect your whole life through the prism of race, or whether you're just going to say, yeah, that was a bit of a bummer time, but we move on.
Yes.
It denies that freedom. It's very hostile to freedom. It's very hostile to tolerance. It's very ungenerous. It goes for zero tolerance rather than tolerance. And it doesn't believe in impartiality. It believes impartiality is a power play. And frankly, that is really disastrous for education, because if you don't believe in truth and you don't believe in the possibility of objectivity, then you have political activism.
So if you're telling kids that, you know, if they're white, they're always going to be privileged, they're always going to be complicit in white supremacy, whether they like it or not, if you're telling children from ethnic minority backgrounds that they're always going to be oppressed, it's not good for the future, is it?
Well, it's not good for the future, and it's not good now, because what it's telling us that our schools are being run by teachers who, a minority of whom actively support this, and the majority of whom are feeling increasingly uncomfortable, but like everyone else in society, finding it difficult to speak out. You know, when you have a teacher like a primary school teacher in East London who's been working for 20 years with her colleagues, black, white, yellow, all kinds of races, and they get a third party in, and this third party activist educator starts reading from Reniedo Lodge's Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People. Imagine you're a black boy, imagine all the hopes and dreams you have, imagine the hopes of your parents, and then you come to school and they're dashed. You know, you will never get anywhere because of systemic racism. She just felt gutted. She felt for the first time in her life, she felt like a white teacher working with black colleagues. And in a very subtle way, the collegiality, the solidarity of teachers working together was undermined.
But a lot of this probably comes from good intentions, doesn't it?
Some of it does. I think you have to differentiate. I think a lot of people, people adopting it in schools are probably doing it from good intentions because they're busy. There are so many problems, prior problems in education anyway. People have not been, they're not accustomed to thinking about questions of knowledge and morality and the purpose of school. It's all been very technocratic and get the results, get the results, get the results. So that's the background. So I think they are probably doing it out of, well, we've got to do something. But they're not stopping to think, why should they? Why should a head in London in 2020 think that an event in Los Angeles, the murder of George Floyd, means that they have to review everything in their school?
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because schools, at least over the past decade or so, have been pretty good at tackling racism. I used to work in a school. When there was the hint of it, we tackled it. We didn't tolerate racism. So it's not as though these have been hotbeds of white supremacy.
Well, exactly, and that shows in the attitudinal surveys that, we've got attitudinal surveys from about 2020. So they'll be with adults who will have been at school the previous 10, 20 years. And, they show Britain is on the whole very relaxed about race and ethnic minorities. We don't, everyone does it, but there's Rishi, and now there's Yusuf.
Hamza Yusuf as well in Scotland.
Hamza Yusuf, and, might have lots of things to say about him, but it's not about his race, right? About politics.
But you're not denying that racism still exists?
No, I think there will be pockets of racism and prejudice. But I think the really important point in the Commission of Racial Disparities report that came out, Tony Sewer's report, was that to say that something is institutionally racist needs a high bar of evidence, right? Because you're making a very serious accusation about an institution, and I think. And there's going to be a problem for the activists who are committed to this because they don't really believe in evidence.
Yes.
They believe in lived experience as testimony.
And a feeling, a kind of sense.
A feeling, which isn't really enough to make a general claim, you see.
Yes.
And then, you sort of think, well, there may well be systemic problems, like in the Casey report shows clearly it's more than a few bad apples. But before we leap to racism being the problem, well, let's look at the leadership. Let's look at what they've been doing and not doing. We've seen what the police are up to or not up to, just in who they protect, who they don't protect, and all the rest of it. There are systemic problems, but I suspect that those problems are much more to do with the problems of leadership, the problems of creating collegial cultures, those kinds of kind of more moral problems that really do need to be discussed, but they're not necessarily racism.
And you've done a lot of freedom of information requests from Don't Divide Us to find out the extent of this. This is quite widespread, this ideology in schools. Yeah. So what would you like to see happen next? I mean, you've got a petition going, haven't you?
We have a petition and we're in the process of the second report. It's very important that somebody with power takes charge of this. Now, people will say, like they did with the sex education review that Rishi Sunak announced a week ago or so, oh, this isn't happening, or this is only happening in a few schools. And that really spectacularly misses the point, because what we have here, we've got the Russell Group universities in Britain. That's the top tier of universities, and they influence what happens in education. 50% of them have got some kind of black-only schemes, running black-only schemes. So they're endorsing this idea of positive discrimination / positive action. Positive discrimination is illegal. Positive action is permissible under certain circumstances. We've got exam boards decolonising their specifications. I don't know if you were an English teacher, Andy.
I was.
Kazuo Ishiguro, Alan Bennett and Mark Haddon have been taken off the selected reading list.
Really?
Kazuo Ishiguro, Never Let Me Go, one of the most fantastic novels you could introduce to teenagers about existential questions about life. But no, it's been replaced by an author, a female author of colour. It may be a good book, but that's not what the AQA is saying. They're quite open. They're doing it to tick the diversity boxes. So you've got the exam boards, you've got the professional associations, you've got the local councils, and then internally within schools, schools are creating roles for equity, diversity and inclusion positions or committees. And they, in some places, they are kind of like, really ruling the roost within the school. Other staff, they're the kind of... morality police within the schools.
So it's definitely a problem. Where can people go to support your petition? How can they do that?
Please do come and have a read of it, sign it, share it, and support our work if you can. You go to don'tdivideus.com.
And what's great about the resources on your website is it puts paid to this idea that it's not happening, because you've gathered together so many testimonies and reports and the like. So, yes, don'tdivideus.com, that's where people can go. Great. Alka Sehgal Cuthbert, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.